Picture this. You're scrolling through Facebook on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. Coffee getting cold in your favorite ceramic mug, the one with the chip on the handle that you keep meaning to replace but never do. Another mindless scroll through vacation photos from people you barely remember from high school, political rants from relatives you see once a year, and sponsored ads for products you don't need. The algorithm feeds you content designed to keep you scrolling, engineered to capture your attention for just a few more seconds, a few more minutes, a few more hours of your life. Then you see it. A selfie from a guy named Michael Davis celebrating his 35th birthday at some chain restaurant in Sacramento. Olive Garden, judging by the breadsticks visible in the background. Broad smile that reaches his eyes. Laugh lines that speak of 3.5 decades of joy and sorrow and ordinary human experience. Nothing unusual about the image. Just another middle-aged man marking another year of existence in the digital age. Except for one thing. At that exact moment, 2,147 miles away in a server room in Quantico, Virginia, the FBI's next-generation identification system is processing Michael Davis's birthday selfie through layers of artificial intelligence trained on decades of missing persons data. Facial recognition algorithms analyze the geometric relationships between his eyes, nose, and mouth. Machine learning models calculate the distance between his pupils, measure the angle of his jawline, map the unique topography of his features, and at 11:43 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the system returns a result that will change everything Michael Davis thought he knew about his own existence. 96.7% probability match to William Billy Thompson, age 8, missing since March 15, 1997. Case number SF 974429. Status cold. Last seen California Academy of Sciences, Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. The San Francisco Police Department's facial recognition algorithm just flagged this image with a confidence level that makes computers certain and humans terrified. Billy Thompson disappeared on March 15, 1997, during what should have been an ordinary third-grade field trip to the California Academy of Sciences in Golden Gate Park. The morning started like any other school day in the Richmond district of San Francisco, fog rolling in from the Pacific Ocean, typical for March. Temperature holding steady at 54 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of weather that makes you pack a jacket you'll carry all day but never actually wear. 24 third graders from Roosevelt Elementary School boarded the yellow school bus at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Billy Thompson sat in seat number 12, right side, 3 rows back from the driver. He wore his favorite red San Francisco Giants baseball cap, the one with the orange SF logo that his father had bought him at Candlestick Park the previous summer. Blue jeans with grass stains on the knees from playground baseball. A striped long-sleeve shirt that his mother, Linda Thompson, had picked out the night before while helping him pack his small blue JanSport backpack. Inside that backpack, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut diagonally because Billy insisted diagonal cuts tasted better than straight cuts. A juice box, apple slices in a plastic bag, his permission slip signed in his mother's careful handwriting, a mechanical pencil he'd won in a classroom contest, and tucked in the front pocket, a photo of his golden retriever, Buddy, taken the previous Christmas morning. Buddy wearing reindeer antlers, tongue hanging out, looking perpetually happy the way golden retrievers always do. The California Academy of Sciences was undergoing major renovations in 1997, but the Steinhardt Aquarium remained open to the public. That's where Mrs. Patterson, Billy's teacher, had planned to spend most of their 3-hour visit. 24 8-year-olds learning about marine biology through the magic of staring at fish swimming in artificially lit tanks. Billy was mesmerized by the tropical fish in the main display tank, bright yellow tangs swimming in endless circles, their movements hypnotic and purposeful. blue-green parrotfish the size of dinner plates, a moray eel hiding in artificial coral, only its head visible, waiting for unwary prey. Billy pressed his face against the glass, breath fogging the surface, completely absorbed in this underwater world that seemed more real than the one he was standing in. Mrs. Patterson remembers checking her watch at 10:35 a.m., 15 more minutes before they needed to move to the next exhibit. She was counting heads the way teachers do, that automatic mental inventory that becomes second nature when you're responsible for other people's children. 24 students clustered around various displays. Billy was at the main tank with 3 other boys from his class. Tommy Martinez, who would grow up to become a marine biologist because of this very field trip, Danny Chen, who would join the Navy and serve on submarines, and Alex Foster, who would develop a lifelong fear of deep water after seeing the moray eel. At 10:41 a.m., Billy told Mrs. Patterson he needed to use the restroom. She pointed toward the facilities near the museum's back entrance, reminded him not to dawdle, and watched him walk away with that particular 8-year-old gait that's half walk, half skip, all energy. His red giant's cap bobbing through the crowd of visitors, getting smaller until it disappeared around a corner near the gift shop. He never came back. Mrs. Patterson noticed first, the way teachers always do. At 10:47 a.m., she counted heads again, 23 students. She counted again, thinking she'd made a mistake. Still 23. Billy's red giant's baseball cap was nowhere to be seen among the group clustered around the seahorse exhibit. "Has anyone seen Billy?" she asked the nearest cluster of students. Head shakes all around. Tommy Martinez thought he'd seen Billy heading toward the bathrooms, but that was several minutes ago. Maybe longer. Time moves differently when you're 8 years old and surrounded by fish. Mrs. Patterson felt the first flutter of panic that every teacher experiences when a child goes missing, even temporarily. She assigned her teaching assistant, Ms. Rodriguez, to stay with the remaining 23 students and went looking for Billy herself. The men's restroom near the back entrance was empty, except for a janitor mopping the floors. No sign of a small boy in a giant's cap. She expanded her search to the gift shop, thinking maybe Billy had been distracted by the stuffed animals and toy dinosaurs that every museum gift shop uses to separate parents from their money. No Billy. The information desk hadn't seen him. The security guard at the main entrance shook his head when shown Billy's school photo. By 11:07 a.m., Mrs. Patterson was no longer looking for a missing student. She was looking for a missing child. There's a difference, and every educator knows it. Missing students wander off and get distracted. Missing children disappear. The California Academy of Sciences initiated Code Adam Protocol at 11:12 a.m. Every exit sealed, every employee mobilized, every visitor politely but firmly detained until the situation could be resolved. The museum transformed from a place of learning into a crime scene in the span of 5 minutes. Billy's small blue JanSport backpack was found at 11:27 a.m. by a security guard named Robert Chen. No relation to Danny Chen from Billy's class, but a detail that would become important later when conspiracy theorists started connecting imaginary dots. The backpack was discovered near the museum's back exit, the same exit that led to the restrooms Billy had supposedly been heading toward. Inside the backpack, everything was exactly as Linda Thompson had packed it the night before. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich, one bite taken from the corner, the juice box, unopened. Apple slices turning brown in their plastic bag. The permission slip with his mother's signature, the mechanical pencil, and in the front pocket, the photo of Buddy the golden retriever, still wearing his reindeer antlers, still looking perpetually happy. What the backpack told investigators was both everything and nothing. Billy had been there. He'd started eating his lunch. He'd planned to come back for his belongings, but somewhere between the aquarium and the exit, between the tropical fish and the outside world, 8-year-old Billy Thompson had simply vanished. The security cameras from 1997 were analog systems that recorded on VHS tapes, grainy and unreliable by today's standards. But they captured something. At 10:41 a.m., Billy Thompson appears on camera walking toward the restrooms, his red Giants cap clearly visible, his distinctive skipping gait unmistakable. At 10:43 a.m., the same camera shows the hallway empty except for other museum visitors. There are no cameras in the restrooms for obvious privacy reasons. There are no cameras showing the back exit where his backpack was found. The blind spots in the museum's security coverage were exactly what you'd expect from a 1990s installation. Adequate for preventing theft, inadequate for tracking individual movements through the building. Billy Thompson simply walked toward the bathroom and never walked back. In the 2 minutes and 17 seconds between 10:41 and 10:43 a.m., he disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed. What happened next was textbook missing child protocol, executed with the kind of precision that comes from years of training and the terrible knowledge that the first few hours determine everything. The California Academy of Sciences went into immediate lockdown at 11:12 a.m., every exit sealed by security personnel who understood that they were now potential witnesses in a criminal investigation. Every visitor questioned by staff members who had been trained for exactly this scenario but hoped they'd never have to use that training. The San Francisco Police Department received the call at 11:18 a.m. Missing child at the Academy of Sciences, age 8. Last seen wearing red Giants baseball cap. Patrol units were dispatched immediately, sirens cutting through the fog-shrouded streets of Golden Gate Park. Detective Sarah McKenna caught the case because she was next up in the rotation and because she had a reputation for finding lost children. 23 years on the force at that point. McKenna had worked dozens of missing children cases during her career. Most had endings, some happy, some tragic, all definitive. She understood the statistics better than she wanted to. 74% of abducted children who are killed are dead within 3 hours of being taken. Every minute that passed after 11:12 a.m. was a minute stolen from Billy Thompson's chances of coming home alive. McKenna arrived at the museum at 11:34 a.m., exactly 22 minutes after the lockdown began. She was a compact woman with prematurely grey hair and eyes that had seen too much of what people do to children when they think nobody's watching. Her first priority was establishing a timeline. Her second was reviewing the security footage. Her third was interviewing every person who had been in the museum when Billy disappeared. The timeline was maddeningly simple. 10:41 a.m. Billy asks permission to use the restroom. Mrs. Patterson points him toward the facilities. He walks away, red cap visible in the crowd. 10:43 a.m. Security camera shows the hallway empty. 10:47 a.m. Mrs. Patterson notices he's missing. 11:07 a.m. Full search of the museum begins. 11:12 a.m. Code Adam protocol initiated. 11:27 a.m. His backpack is found near the back exit. 6 minutes and 17 seconds. That's how long Billy Thompson had been missing before anyone noticed. In those 6 minutes, a child had vanished from a crowded public building in broad daylight, with dozens of witnesses around and security cameras recording. It should have been impossible. It was impossible. But it had happened anyway. The security footage was reviewed frame by technicians who understood that they were looking for evidence in what might become a murder case. The grainy VHS quality made identification difficult, but Billy's red Giants cap was distinctive enough to track through several camera angles. They could see him walking toward the restrooms with the confident stride of a child who knew exactly where he was going and expected to return in a few minutes. What they couldn't see was what happened next. The cameras showed other visitors entering and leaving the restroom area, but none of them were small boys in Giants caps. The back exit, where his backpack was found, wasn't covered by cameras at all. It was a maintenance exit that should have been locked during public hours, but was found propped open when security checked it. Every visitor in the museum was questioned. Families with children, elderly couples, school groups, individual adults who might have been there for legitimate educational purposes or might have been there for darker reasons. Each person was asked to provide identification, contact information, and a detailed account of their movements through the museum that morning. One visitor stood out, a woman in her mid-30s who had been seen near the restroom area around the time Billy disappeared. She gave her name as Helen Martinez and said she was a nurse from Fresno visiting San Francisco for a medical conference. She had valid identification, a believable story, and no obvious connection to Billy Thompson or his family. But something about her demeanor made Detective McKenna take extra notes. Helen Martinez claimed she had been in the women's restroom when Billy would have been in the men's room. She said she hadn't seen anything unusual, hadn't noticed a small boy in distress, hadn't heard any sounds that might indicate a struggle. Her story was consistent and plausible, but McKenna had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts said there was something off about Helen Martinez's overly helpful cooperation. But instincts aren't evidence, and evidence was what McKenna needed to find Billy Thompson. The physical search of the museum had turned up nothing except his abandoned backpack. The interviews with visitors had produced no witnesses to an abduction. The security footage showed a child walking toward a bathroom and never walking back, but it didn't show anyone taking him or forcing him to leave. By 6 p.m. on March 15, 1997, the initial search had expanded beyond the museum. Golden Gate Park was crawling with police officers, search dogs and volunteers who understood that they were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of 1,017 acres. The park had hidden trails, dense vegetation, abandoned buildings, and countless places where a child could be hidden or where evidence could be disposed of. The search dogs found Billy's scent trail leading from the museum's back exit toward the park's interior, but the trail went cold after about 50 yards. Either Billy had been placed in a vehicle at that point, or the dogs had lost the scent for other reasons. Scent trails are fragile things, easily disrupted by weather, time, and the thousands of other human smells that permeate a public space like Golden Gate Park. Frank Thompson, Billy's father, arrived at the museum at 2:47 p.m. after receiving the call at his construction job in Daly City. He was still wearing his work boots and hard hat when Detective McKenna first interviewed him. A man built for physical labor, reduced to helplessness by the disappearance of his son. His first question was the same question every parent asks in this situation. "What do you need me to do?" Linda Thompson arrived 15 minutes later, having left her job at a downtown insurance office the moment she got the call. She was a small woman with Billy's same bright eyes and stubborn cowlick that never quite lay flat. She carried a recent photo of Billy in her purse, the kind of school picture that every parent carries and hopes they'll never need to show to police officers. The Thompsons' marriage had been solid before March 15, 1997. They were typical middle-class parents dealing with typical middle-class problems: mortgage payments, career pressures, the ordinary challenges of raising a child in an expensive city. Frank worked construction. Linda worked insurance claims. They had been together since high school, married for 12 years, planning to have more children once their finances were more stable. The disappearance of their son would destroy their marriage, but they didn't know that yet. On March 15th, they were just two parents sitting in a police station, holding hands and trying to understand how their child could vanish from a crowded museum in the middle of the morning. Detective McKenna explained the search process with the kind of professional compassion that comes from years of delivering bad news to good people. Every available resource was being deployed. The FBI had been notified and would be taking over the case if Billy wasn't found within 24 hours. The media had been contacted and would be broadcasting Billy's photo on the evening news. Amber Alert protocols, though not yet called by that name, were being activated throughout Northern California. But McKenna also had to explain the reality of missing children cases. The statistics that every law enforcement officer knows but hopes never to use. The fact that most stranger abductions end badly. The fact that the first 72 hours are critical. The fact that every hour that passed without finding Billy reduced the chances of finding him alive. Frank Thompson asked the question that haunts every parent in this situation. What are the odds of getting him back? McKenna couldn't give him the answer he wanted to hear, so she gave him the answer he needed to hear. We're going to do everything possible to bring Billy home. But privately, McKenna was already thinking about this case in past tense. 23 years of experience had taught her to read the signs. A child doesn't vanish from a crowded public building without help. Someone had planned this. Someone had waited for the right opportunity. Someone had taken Billy Thompson for reasons that probably didn't include returning him safely to his parents. The evening news broadcast Billy's disappearance as the lead story on March 15, 1997. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5 and Channel 7 all ran the same basic information. 8-year-old boy missing from Golden Gate Park, last seen wearing Red Giants baseball cap. Anyone with information should contact the San Francisco Police Department immediately. Billy's school photo appeared on television screens throughout the Bay Area, a gap-toothed smile that would become iconic in the weeks and months that followed. The phone tips started coming in immediately. Someone had seen a boy matching Billy's description at a bus stop in the Sunset District. Another caller reported a suspicious man with a child at a McDonald's in Oakland. A woman in Marin County was certain she'd seen Billy getting into a blue sedan near the Golden Gate Bridge. Each tip was investigated, each lead followed to its inevitable dead end. This is how missing children cases work in the real world. Hundreds of well-meaning people see what they think they see, report what they think they remember, and send police officers chasing ghosts through a city of 750,000 people. Most tips are generated by genuine concern mixed with imperfect memory. Some are from attention seekers who want to insert themselves into a tragedy. A few are from people with serious mental health issues who genuinely believe they've witnessed something significant. Detective McKenna assigned officers to follow every credible lead, but she knew that the real investigation would be built on evidence, not tips. She focused on the people who had been in the museum when Billy disappeared, the staff members who had access to areas not covered by cameras, and the timeline that showed a child walking toward a bathroom and never walking back. The woman who called herself Helen Martinez became a person of interest, not because she had done anything obviously suspicious, but because her story felt rehearsed in a way that legitimate stories rarely do. McKenna had her business card from the medical conference she claimed to be attending, but when detectives called the conference organizers, there was no record of a Helen Martinez being registered. The address on her driver's license led to an apartment building in Fresno, where nobody had heard of Helen Martinez. The phone number she'd provided was disconnected. The medical facility where she claimed to work had no employee by that name. Helen Martinez had given a completely fictional identity to police officers investigating a missing child, and now she was nowhere to be found. But having a person of interest isn't the same as having a suspect, and having a suspect isn't the same as having evidence. McKenna needed proof that Helen Martinez had taken Billy Thompson, and proof was the one thing that seemed to disappear along with the child himself. The case that would define Detective McKenna's career was already slipping through her fingers after just 48 hours. By March 17, 1997, the intensive search of Golden Gate Park had been scaled back. The FBI had officially taken over the investigation, bringing federal resources and national databases to bear on finding Billy Thompson. Agent Patricia Williams, a specialist in crimes against children, arrived from the San Francisco field office with a team of investigators who understood that they were now looking for a body as much as a living child. The transition from local to federal investigation is always difficult for families. McKenna had built a rapport with Frank and Linda Thompson, but now they were dealing with federal agents who spoke in carefully measured phrases about ongoing investigations and following all available leads. The personal touch that McKenna had provided was replaced by bureaucratic efficiency that felt cold even when it was well-intentioned. Agent Williams established a command center at the FBI's San Francisco field office, a sterile environment of fluorescent lights and computer screens where Billy Thompson's disappearance became case file number 315A-SF 97429. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, every interview transcribed, every lead entered into databases that could cross-reference information with similar cases throughout the country. The FBI brought resources that local police couldn't match. Behavioral analysts who could create psychological profiles of potential suspects, computer specialists who could enhance the grainy security footage from the museum, forensic accountants who could track financial records for anyone connected to the case. But all the federal resources in the world couldn't change the fundamental problem. Billy Thompson had vanished without leaving any usable evidence behind. The behavioral profile of Billy's likely abductor was disturbingly generic. Probably male, probably between 25 and 45 years old, probably with some connection to children through work or family, possibly someone who had been planning this crime for weeks or months, watching Billy's routine, learning his schedule, waiting for the right opportunity. The profile could have described thousands of men in the San Francisco Bay Area. But Agent Williams was particularly interested in the mysterious Helen Martinez, the nurse from Fresno, who had given false information to police and then disappeared. A woman who uses a fake identity during a child abduction investigation is either a paranoid citizen who doesn't trust law enforcement or someone with a very good reason to avoid police scrutiny. Either way, she needed to be found and questioned. The search for Helen Martinez led federal investigators into a labyrinth of false identities and dead-end addresses. The driver's license she'd shown at the museum was a sophisticated fake, good enough to pass casual inspection, but manufactured using stolen personal information. The real Helen Martinez was a 67-year-old grandmother living in Phoenix who had never been to San Francisco and whose identity had been stolen months earlier. This was 1997. Before identity theft became a commonly understood crime, before credit monitoring and identity protection services, before people routinely worried about having their personal information stolen and misused. The woman who had taken Helen Martinez's identity was skilled at creating false documentation, which suggested either professional criminal experience or access to resources that most people don't have. The investigation expanded to include other missing children cases throughout California, looking for patterns that might connect Billy's disappearance to previous crimes. What they found was disturbing, but not immediately helpful. Between 1995 and 1997, 7 children had disappeared under similar circumstances in Northern California. All were boys between the ages of 6 and 10. All had vanished from public places during daylight hours. All had left behind personal belongings, but no witnesses to their actual abduction. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit suggested that these disappearances might be connected, possibly the work of a single individual or organized group involved in child trafficking. But connecting cases isn't the same as solving them, and 7 missing children with no suspects or evidence created a pattern without a solution. Frank and Linda Thompson struggled to maintain normal lives while living in the nightmare of not knowing what had happened to their son. Frank returned to his construction job after a week, not because he wanted to, but because they needed the income, and because sitting at home, waiting for phone calls, was driving him toward a breakdown. Linda took indefinite leave from the insurance office, spending her days calling other parents of missing children, organizing search parties, and slowly losing her grip on the life she'd built before March 15th. The strain on their marriage was immediate and relentless. Grief affects people differently, and Frank and Linda discovered that they couldn't grieve together without making each other's pain worse. Frank wanted to focus on practical matters, talking to investigators, following leads, doing something active to find their son. Linda wanted to focus on emotional preparation, planning for Billy's return, keeping his room exactly as he'd left it, maintaining hope in the face of increasingly grim statistics. They started sleeping in separate bedrooms after the first month, not because they'd stopped loving each other, but because they'd started dreaming about Billy and waking each other up with their nightmares. Frank would dream about finding Billy's body. Linda would dream about Billy coming home and not recognizing his parents. Both dreams were unbearable, but they were unbearable in different ways that couldn't be shared or comforted. The media attention was intense for the first few weeks, then gradually faded as other stories took precedence. Billy's disappearance was featured on America's Most Wanted twice, generating hundreds of tips that led nowhere. His photo appeared on milk cartons throughout California, a reminder to thousands of families that children can disappear even when parents do everything right. But media attention has a half-life, and by summer 1997, Billy Thompson was no longer front-page news. The investigators were still working the case, but the urgency had shifted from rescue to recovery. Instead of looking for a living child, they were looking for evidence of what had happened to him. Detective McKenna never stopped thinking about Billy Thompson, even after the FBI took over the case. His school photo remained on the bulletin board above her desk, a gap-toothed smile that reminded her every day that some cases don't have endings. She continued following leads on her own time, interviewing potential witnesses, checking with hospitals and social services for any sign of a boy matching Billy's description. In September 1997, 6 months after Billy's disappearance, McKenna received a phone call that seemed promising. A social worker in Fresno had a case involving a boy who claimed not to remember his life before a car accident. The boy was approximately the right age, had the right hair color, and had been found wandering alone with no identification. But when McKenna drove to Fresno to investigate, the boy was clearly not Billy Thompson. Different facial structure, different eye color, different everything, except the desperate hope of a detective who wanted to solve an unsolvable case. That trip to Fresno was the beginning of McKenna's obsession with Billy Thompson's disappearance. Over the following years, she would drive to Fresno dozens of times, following tips and hunches and the faint possibility that somehow Billy had ended up in the Central Valley with people who claimed to be his family. She never found him, but she never stopped looking. The official investigation continued for 2 years before being reclassified as a cold case. Agent Williams was reassigned to other cases involving missing children who might still be saved. The FBI's resources were redirected toward crimes with better prospects for resolution. Billy Thompson's case file was transferred to a storage room where it would wait for new evidence that might never come. Frank and Linda Thompson divorced in 2002, 5 years after their son's disappearance. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, but the real reason was simpler: they couldn't survive the not knowing together. Frank remarried in 2005 to a woman who understood that part of his heart would always belong to a missing child. Linda never remarried, dedicating her life to searching for Billy and helping other families navigate the nightmare of missing children. Linda kept Billy's room exactly as he'd left it on the morning of March 15, 1997. Superman sheets that she washed and changed regularly, even though no one slept in them. Model airplanes hanging from fishing line, gathering dust but never disturbed. A calendar still turned to March 1997, frozen in time like everything else in that room. Every birthday, she bought Billy a present and wrapped it in bright paper. 27 gifts accumulated in his closet like monuments to hope and denial. The golden retriever Buddy lived until 2003, dying of cancer at the age of 9. Linda buried him in the backyard with a headstone that read, "Buddy Thompson, waiting for Billy." She never got another dog, couldn't bear the thought of replacing something Billy had loved, couldn't imagine explaining to a new pet why his favorite boy never came home. Detective McKenna retired in 2018 after 34 years on the force. She passed Billy's file to Detective James Rodriguez, a younger officer who had grown up hearing about the Thompson case. By then, Billy Thompson was San Francisco legend, the boy who disappeared in broad daylight from one of the city's most visited attractions. New officers learned about the case during training, a reminder that some mysteries resist solution no matter how much effort and resources are applied to them. But McKenna's retirement didn't end her involvement in Billy's case. She continued investigating on her own time, using contacts throughout law enforcement to follow any lead that might produce new information. She was 67 years old and supposed to be enjoying retirement, but she couldn't let go of the 8-year-old boy who had defined her career and haunted her dreams. Rodriguez inherited more than just a case file when he took over Billy's investigation. He inherited McKenna's obsession, her theories, her hope that somewhere in California, a boy who disappeared in 1997 was still alive and still findable. The case had grown beyond its original parameters, becoming a symbol of law enforcement's limitations and the enduring power of parental love. But technology doesn't retire, and by 2020, the tools available to investigators had evolved far beyond what McKenna and Agent Williams had worked with in 1997. Digital databases contained millions of faces. Artificial intelligence could age-progress photos with remarkable accuracy. Social media platforms provided new ways to search for missing persons and new opportunities for families to connect across time and distance. The San Francisco Police Department's facial recognition system was upgraded in 2023 as part of a broader modernization effort funded by federal grants and city bonds. The new system could process thousands of images per minute, comparing them against databases of missing persons, criminal suspects, and unidentified remains. It could account for aging, weight changes, facial hair, and other factors that make human identification difficult. The system was designed to run continuously, scanning public photos uploaded to social media platforms, dating websites, professional networks, and any other online service that allowed users to post images of themselves. Privacy advocates raised concerns about the surveillance implications, but law enforcement argued that the technology could solve cold cases and reunite families that had been separated by crime. Most of the system's alerts were false positives, statistical noise generated by the inevitable similarities between human faces, but occasionally the artificial intelligence would identify a match with sufficient confidence to warrant human investigation. A missing child aged 20 years might be found in a LinkedIn profile photo. A robbery suspect might be identified in a Facebook selfie. A cold case might suddenly become hot again because someone posted a birthday photo. On March 12, 2024, at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the system flagged an image that would change everything Linda Thompson thought she knew about hope and grief and the possibility of impossible things. The image was a birthday selfie posted by Michael Davis, age 35, celebrating at an Olive Garden in Sacramento, California. The system had aged Billy Thompson's 1997 school photo through 27 years of growth and development and found a 96.7% probability match with the man holding breadsticks and smiling at the camera. 96.7% confidence meant that the artificial intelligence was almost certain that Michael Davis and Billy Thompson were the same person. In algorithmic terms, this wasn't a maybe or a possibility. This was as close to certainty as mathematics could provide when applied to human faces separated by nearly 3 decades. Thompson case. It was San Francisco legend by then. The boy who disappeared in broad daylight. But technology doesn't retire, and in 2023, the San Francisco Police Department upgraded their facial recognition system. The new AI could age-progress faces with 94% accuracy. It could cross-reference millions of social media images in real time. It could find needles in digital haystacks that human eyes would never spot. The system ran continuously, scanning every public photo uploaded to major platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, dating apps, feeding faces through algorithms trained on decades of missing persons data. Most matches were false positives: a mother who looked like her missing daughter, a grandfather who resembled his vanished grandson. Statistical noise in an ocean of faces. But on March 12, 2024, at 3:17 a.m., the system flagged something different. The confidence level was unusually high, 96.7%, the kind of match that makes algorithms sit up and take notice. The photo was a birthday selfie posted by Michael Davis, age 35, location tagged Sacramento, California. The system had aged Billy Thompson's 1997 school photo and found its mirror image in a man celebrating 3.5 decades of life he shouldn't remember living. Detective Rodriguez received the alert on his iPhone at 6:22 a.m. on Tuesday, March 12, 2024. He was making coffee in his kitchen in the Richmond district, the same neighborhood where Billy Thompson had lived 27 years earlier. The notification appeared as a simple text message: facial recognition match, case SF 974429, confidence 96.7%, review immediately. Nati, Rodriguez had been with the SFPD for 8 years, but he'd inherited the Billy Thompson case only 6 months earlier when Detective McKenna finally agreed to stop consulting on cold cases. The file consumed 3 bankers' boxes and contained more than 2,000 pages of reports, interview transcripts, and evidence catalogues. Rodriguez had read every page, memorized every detail, and understood why McKenna had never been able to let this case go. His first instinct was to dismiss the alert as another false positive. The facial recognition system generated dozens of potential matches every week, most of them statistically interesting, but practically meaningless. A missing child from 1987, supposedly identified in a driver's license photo from Nevada. A kidnapping victim from 1994, allegedly spotted in a passport application from Florida. The mathematics of facial recognition were impressive, but human faces were more variable than algorithms sometimes understood. But 96.7% confidence was unusually high. Most false positives registered between 60% and 80% probability. Anything above 90% was rare enough to deserve serious investigation. Rodriguez opened the alert on his laptop and found himself staring at 2 images side by side: Billy Thompson's 1997 school photo and a birthday selfie posted by Michael Davis just hours earlier. The resemblance was undeniable, even to human eyes untrained in facial recognition technology. The same bone structure, the same eye shape, the same subtle asymmetry in the left eyebrow that made Billy's school photo distinctive. But what struck Rodriguez most powerfully was something the artificial intelligence couldn't quantify: the expression. Both images showed the same slightly crooked smile, the same way of holding the head at a 3/4 angle, the same fundamental humanity that transcended age and circumstance. Rodriguez called in sick to work that day, not because he was ill, but because he needed time to process what he was looking at and figure out how to approach what might be the biggest break in the most famous cold case in San Francisco history. He spent the morning researching Michael Davis, using law enforcement databases and public records to build a profile of the man who might be Billy Thompson. Michael Davis lived at 2847 Maple Street in Sacramento, California, approximately 90 miles northeast of San Francisco. Property records showed he'd purchased the house in 2019 for $485,000, financed through a conventional mortgage with Wells Fargo Bank. The loan was current, no missed payments, no refinancing. Credit reports showed a man who paid his bills on time and lived within his means. Employment records indicated that Michael Davis worked as a senior software engineer for Carmichael Medical Devices, a company that manufactured diagnostic equipment for hospitals and clinics. His salary was $127,000 per year, placing him solidly in the upper middle class. He'd been with the company since 2017, promoted twice, described by supervisors as reliable and technically competent. DMV records showed Michael Davis had been licensed to drive in California since 2006. Clean driving record, no accidents, no violations more serious than a parking ticket. He owned a 2021 Honda Accord, purchased used, financed through the credit union at his workplace. He was registered to vote as a Democrat and had voted in every election since 2008. On paper, Michael Davis was the portrait of an ordinary American success story. Steady job, suburban home, responsible financial management, civic engagement. But Rodriguez was looking for anomalies, the details that didn't fit the pattern of a normal life constructed from normal choices. The first anomaly was Michael's earliest official record. His Social Security number had been issued in 1998, when he would have been 9 years old. Most children receive Social Security numbers at birth or during their first year of life. A number issued at age 9 suggested either immigrant parents who didn't understand the system or unusual circumstances that required late registration. The second anomaly was his birth certificate, which had been issued as a replacement copy in 1998. The original was supposedly destroyed in a clerical fire at the Fresno County Records Office. But when Rodriguez contacted Fresno County, there was no record of any fire affecting birth certificates in 1998. The replacement certificate existed and appeared legitimate, but the story behind its issuance was questionable. The third anomaly was his school records, which began in 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Fresno. Most children have educational records starting in kindergarten or 1st grade. Michael Davis appeared in the school system at age 9 with no prior academic history, as if he had materialized fully formed in a 4th grade classroom. But the most significant anomaly was Michael's complete lack of childhood medical records before 1998. No pediatrician visits, no vaccinations, no emergency room treatments, no prescription medications. For the first 8 years of his life, Michael Davis had apparently never been sick enough to see a doctor, which was statistically improbable for any child growing up in America. Rodriguez found Michael Davis's adoption records sealed by court order, which was standard practice, but unusual for someone who had supposedly been raised by his biological parents. The adoption paperwork had been filed in Fresno County Family Court in December 1998, 9 months after Michael first appeared in official records. The adoptive parents were listed as Robert and Helen Davis, both residents of Fresno with no prior children. Helen Davis. The name sent electricity through Rodriguez's nervous system. Helen Davis had been Helen Martinez in 1997, the mysterious woman who had given false information to police investigating Billy Thompson's disappearance. The nurse from Fresno, who didn't exist, who had vanished as completely as Billy himself, But now she was Helen Davis, legal adoptive mother to a boy who had no official existence before 1998. Rodriguez spent the afternoon verifying what he already suspected. Helen Martinez and Helen Davis were the same person, using her maiden name in 1997 and her married name in 1998. She had been at the California Academy of Sciences on the day Billy Thompson disappeared, had given false information to investigators, and had subsequently adopted a boy with no verifiable history who looked exactly like the missing child would look after aging 27 years. The mathematical probability that these connections were coincidental was so small that it might as well have been zero. Michael Davis was Billy Thompson. The facial recognition system hadn't made a mistake. It had solved a case that had stumped human investigators for nearly 3 decades. But knowing the truth and proving it were two different problems entirely. Rodriguez needed DNA evidence to confirm what the artificial intelligence had discovered. He needed to approach Michael Davis carefully, because if the man truly had no memory of his life before 1998, the revelation could be psychologically devastating, and he needed to involve federal authorities because kidnapping across state lines was a federal crime regardless of how much time had passed. Rodriguez called FBI agent Lisa Chang at the San Francisco field office, explaining the situation in terms that conveyed both the significance of the discovery and the delicacy required in pursuing it. Agent Chang had worked crimes against children for 12 years and understood immediately that they were dealing with a case that would generate national media attention and intense scrutiny of their investigative methods. Agent Chang's first question was whether they should contact Linda Thompson before approaching Michael Davis. The ethical considerations were complex. Linda had a right to know that her son might have been found, but she also deserved protection from false hope if the identification turned out to be wrong. They decided to confirm Michael's identity through DNA testing before involving the family, a decision that would haunt Agent Chang for months afterward. The challenge was obtaining Michael Davis's DNA without his knowledge or consent, which would be legally problematic and ethically questionable. They needed his cooperation, but asking for DNA implied accusations that might destroy an innocent man's life if they were wrong. The solution was to approach the situation as a wellness check, investigating reports of a missing person who might match Michael's description. Agent Chang and Detective Rodriguez drove to Sacramento on Thursday, March 14, 2024, 2 days before the 27th anniversary of Billy Thompson's disappearance. The timing wasn't intentional, but it felt symbolic in a way that neither investigator was comfortable acknowledging. They were driving toward a resolution that had seemed impossible for most of their careers. In 2847, Maple Street was in a neighborhood of similar houses built in the early 2000s, when Sacramento was expanding rapidly and young families were seeking affordable alternatives to Bay Area real estate prices. Michael Davis's house was well maintained but unremarkable. Beige stucco exterior, small front yard with drought-resistant landscaping, 2-car garage, the kind of property that represented middle-class stability without ostentation. Rodriguez rang the doorbell at 10:30 a.m., a time calculated to catch Michael at home if he was working remotely, but not so early as to seem threatening. The man who answered the door looked exactly like the aged progression photos that FBI analysts had created of Billy Thompson over the years. Same height, same build, same facial structure that had been predicted by computer models designed to account for normal human development. But more than physical resemblance, Michael Davis carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never doubted his own identity. He smiled politely at the two strangers on his doorstep, assuming they were salespeople or political canvassers or neighbors, with some minor complaint about parking or noise. He had no reason to suspect that his entire existence was about to be called into question by people with badges and questions about his childhood. Agent Chang identified herself and Detective Rodriguez, explaining that they were investigating a missing person case and wondered if Michael might have information that could help their investigation. She showed him Billy Thompson's school photo, asking if the child looked familiar, if Michael might have encountered him during his own childhood in California. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Michael stared at the photo for a full 30 seconds without speaking, his expression shifting from polite curiosity to confusion to something approaching recognition. His hands began to shake slightly, an involuntary response that suggested the image had triggered some deep neurological memory, even if he couldn't consciously access it. This is going to sound strange, Michael said, still staring at Billy's school photo. But I think I used to have dreams about a dog named Buddy, a golden retriever. Does that mean anything? Agent Chang felt her heart rate accelerate. Buddy was one of the details that had never been released to the public, one of the facts that investigators held back to verify authentic leads and eliminate false confessions. Michael Davis had no way of knowing about Buddy unless he was Billy Thompson, or unless someone had told him information that only the Thompson family and law enforcement possessed. Detective Rodriguez asked Michael if they could come inside to talk more privately. Michael agreed, still studying Billy's photo, still trying to understand why an image of a stranger felt like looking at himself in a mirror. He led them into his living room, a comfortable space with family photos on the mantel and children's toys scattered on the floor. The family photos told a story of normal domestic happiness. Michael, with a woman who was presumably his wife, both of them younger and thinner in earlier pictures. 2 children, a girl and a boy, captured at various stages of growth from infancy to elementary school age. Birthday parties, vacation trips, Christmas mornings, the visual diary of a family that had built itself around love and shared experience. But Agent Chang noticed what wasn't in the photos. No images of Michael as a child. No pictures of him with older adults who might be parents or grandparents. No graduation photos, no sports teams, no school pictures, no evidence of his existence before adulthood. The photo collection began with Michael as a young man in his 20s, as if his personal history started when he was old enough to create his own memories. Michael invited them to sit on his couch while he made coffee, his hands still shaking slightly as he handled the cups and saucers. He seemed eager to help with their investigation, assuming that he might have some peripheral knowledge that could assist in finding a missing child. He had no idea that he was the missing child, that the investigation was about him, that his entire understanding of his own life was about to be rewritten by DNA evidence and artificial intelligence. Agent Chang asked Michael about his earliest memories, a seemingly innocent question that might reveal how much he actually remembered about his childhood. Michael's response was exactly what they expected and exactly what they dreaded. His first clear memory was waking up in a hospital bed in Fresno in 1998, age 9, with no recollection of how he had gotten there or what his life had been like before that moment. The people he knew as his parents, Robert and Helen Davis, had explained that he'd been in a terrible car accident. Traumatic amnesia, the doctors had said. His memories might return eventually, but they never did. He'd built his entire identity on the foundation of that hospital room and the loving couple who had claimed him as their son. Michael spoke about his adoptive parents with genuine affection. Helen had been a nurse who worked long hours, but always made time for his school projects and soccer games. Robert had been an accountant who taught him about money management and responsibility. They had been good parents in every way that mattered, providing love and stability and opportunities that had shaped him into a successful adult. But they had also been kidnappers, though Michael didn't know that yet. They had stolen a child from his biological family and constructed an elaborate fiction to explain his presence in their lives. They had committed the perfect crime by making their victim complicit in his own disappearance, by convincing him that his false identity was the only identity he had ever possessed. Agent Chang asked Michael if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample to help with their investigation. She explained that they were looking for biological relatives of missing children, and that DNA testing could sometimes identify family connections that weren't obvious through traditional investigation. She didn't explain that they already knew who his biological relatives were, that they were testing to confirm rather than discover his identity. Michael agreed immediately, eager to help find a missing child, even if it meant subjecting himself to medical procedures. Agent Chang collected saliva samples using a standard DNA kit, carefully labeling the specimens and maintaining the chain of custody that would be essential if the case ever went to trial. The samples would be processed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, with results available within 72 hours. But Agent Chang also needed to prepare Michael for what those results might reveal. She explained that sometimes missing children cases were resolved in unexpected ways, that families were reunited after many years, that people sometimes discovered their own identities had been more complicated than they realized. She was trying to soften the psychological impact of learning that everything he thought he knew about himself was wrong. Michael listened politely, but didn't seem to understand that Agent Chang was talking about him. He was focused on helping find a missing child, not on questioning his own existence. The possibility that he might be Billy Thompson hadn't occurred to him, despite the obvious physical resemblance and the strange familiarity of the school photo and the inexplicable memories of a golden retriever named Buddy. Agent Chang asked Michael not to discuss their visit with anyone until the investigation was complete, explaining that premature disclosure could compromise their efforts to solve the case. Michael agreed, assuming that he was now part of a law enforcement operation rather than the subject of one. He shook hands with both investigators, thanked them for their service, and wished them luck in finding the missing child. As they drove back to San Francisco, Agent Chang and Detective Rodriguez discussed the ethical implications of what they had just done. They had obtained DNA evidence under false pretenses from a man who didn't understand that he was the subject of their investigation. They had strong reason to believe that Michael Davis was Billy Thompson, but they hadn't given him the opportunity to make an informed decision about providing genetic material that would fundamentally alter his understanding of his own life. But they had also potentially solved one of the most famous missing children cases in California history. They had used legal and ethical investigative methods to identify a kidnapping victim who had been missing for 27 years. They had followed the evidence wherever it led, which was exactly what they were trained and sworn to do. The DNA results came back on Sunday, March 17, 2024. 99.97% probability that Michael Davis was the biological son of Frank and Linda Thompson. The remaining 0.03% was statistical margin of error, the mathematical acknowledgement that absolute certainty is impossible when dealing with genetic evidence. But for practical purposes, there was no doubt. Billy Thompson had been found. Agent Chang called Linda Thompson at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, a conversation that would end 27 years of not knowing and begin a new phase of uncertainty about what reunion actually means when the missing person doesn't remember being lost. Linda was gardening in her backyard when the phone rang, working in the flower bed she had planted to memorialize Billy's disappearance. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Agent Lisa Chang with the FBI. I'm calling about your son Billy. We have reason to believe that we've found him." Linda dropped her gardening trowel, the metal hitting the concrete with a sound that would echo in her memory for the rest of her life. 27 years of hope and despair and desperate prayer collapsed into a single moment of pure possibility. Her son was alive. Her son had been found. Everything she had never stopped believing was true, but Agent Chang had to explain the complications immediately. Billy was now Michael Davis, a 35-year-old man living in Sacramento with a wife and children of his own. He had no memory of his life before 1998. He didn't know that he was Billy Thompson. The reunion that Linda had imagined for 27 years would be nothing like what she had expected. Linda asked the question that every parent in her situation would ask: when can I see him? Agent Chang explained that they needed to approach the situation carefully, that Michael's psychological well-being had to be considered, that revealing his true identity might be traumatic for someone who had built his entire adult life on what he thought was his only identity. But Linda had waited 27 years. She could wait a few more days for the reunion to be arranged properly. She could be patient if patience meant protecting the son she had never stopped loving, even if he was now a stranger who wouldn't recognize her face or remember her voice or understand why a woman he'd never met was crying when she looked at him. Agent Chang contacted Michael Davis that evening, asking him to come to the FBI's Sacramento field office the following morning for a follow-up interview about their missing person case. Michael agreed, still assuming that he was helping with someone else's investigation, still unaware that the DNA sample he had provided would fundamentally alter his understanding of his own existence. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Monday, March 18, 2024. Agent Chang would tell Michael Davis that he was Billy Thompson. Detective Rodriguez would provide details about the kidnapping and the 27-year search for the missing child. And somewhere in San Francisco, Linda Thompson would wait by her phone for news about a son who had become a stranger, and a stranger who had always been her son. The conversation that would change Michael Davis's life forever was still 12 hours away. For one last night, he would sleep peacefully in his house on Maple Street, secure in the knowledge of who he was and where he belonged. By the next evening, that security would be gone forever, replaced by questions that might never have satisfactory answers and connections to people who remembered loving someone he couldn't remember being. The artificial intelligence that had solved Billy Thompson's case continued processing faces throughout the night, scanning social media photos and public databases, looking for other missing children who might be hiding in plain sight. The technology didn't understand the human cost of its discoveries, didn't consider the psychological implications of revealing that someone's entire identity was built on lies. But it had worked exactly as designed. It had found a needle in a haystack, connected past and present, reunited a family that had been torn apart by crime and circumstance. Whether that reunion would heal old wounds or create new ones remained to be seen. The boy who had disappeared in 1997 was about to learn that he had never really disappeared at all. He had just been living someone else's life, while the people who loved him spent 27 years wondering if he was alive or dead. The technology that found him was perfect. The human relationships that would result from finding him were infinitely more complicated. Tomorrow, Michael Davis would discover that his name was Billy Thompson. Tomorrow, Linda Thompson would meet the son she had never stopped looking for. Tomorrow, a missing child case would be solved and a family would be reunited, and the artificial intelligence would move on to the next face in its endless digital search. But tonight, for just a few more hours, Billy Thompson remained missing and Michael Davis remained himself, and the complications of being found were still 12 hours in the future. Michael Davis lived at 2847 Maple Street in Sacramento. Property records showed he'd bought the house in 2019. Mortgage in good standing, no criminal record. He worked as a software engineer for a medical device company, paid his taxes, volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. By every metric that mattered, he was a model citizen living a perfectly ordinary life. But here's what wasn't ordinary. His earliest memory was from 1998, age 9, waking up in a hospital bed in Fresno with no memory of how he got there. The people who claimed to be his parents, Robert and Helen Davis, said he'd been in a terrible car accident, traumatic amnesia. The doctor said it might come back. It never did. He'd built his entire identity on the foundation of that hospital room and the loving couple who raised him as their own son. The Davis family had paperwork. Birth certificate dated 1989, Social Security card issued in 1998 after the accident, school records starting in 4th grade. Everything looked legitimate on the surface. But Detective Rodriguez had learned to look deeper. He ran the birth certificate through the state database. It existed, but it was issued as a replacement copy in 1998. The original was supposedly lost in a clerical fire. Convenient, too convenient. He dug into Robert and Helen Davis, upstanding citizens, no criminal history. They'd moved to Fresno in 1997, just months before Michael appeared in their lives. Helen worked as a nurse at Fresno General Hospital. Access to medical records, knowledge of trauma cases. Robert was an accountant, good with paperwork, good with making things look official. Here's where the story takes a turn that changes everything you thought you knew about missing children cases. Detective Rodriguez didn't rush to Sacramento with handcuffs and DNA kits. He called in the FBI, specifically Agent Lisa Chang from the Crimes Against Children Unit. Because if Billy Thompson had become Michael Davis through illegal adoption or worse, this case was about to get very complicated very quickly. Agent Chang had seen this before. Not exactly this, but similar patterns. Children who disappear and resurface years later with new identities and no memory of their past lives. It's rarer than you might think, but not impossible. Sometimes it's trafficking. Sometimes it's desperate people who can't have children legally finding another way. Sometimes it's something darker. The challenge was approaching Michael Davis without destroying his life if they were wrong. Because what do you tell a 35-year-old man with a wife and 2 kids that his entire existence might be built on a lie? How do you shatter someone's world to solve a cold case? These were the questions that kept Agent Chang awake at night, but the facial recognition didn't lie. 96.7% confidence. 3 separate algorithms confirmed the match. Microsoft Azure returned 94.3%. Amazon recognition hit 95.1%. Google's system, the most conservative, still showed 91.8%. The mathematical probability of error was less than 0.01%. In the language of artificial intelligence, this wasn't a maybe. This was a certainty wrapped in digital precision. They decided to approach it like a wellness check. Agent Chang and Detective Rodriguez would drive to Sacramento, knock on Michael Davis's door, ask some gentle questions about his childhood. See if any memories surfaced when confronted with his possible past. If he wasn't Billy Thompson, no harm done. If he was, they'd figured out what happened to one of California's most famous missing children. What they didn't expect was what happened when they rang the doorbell at 2847 Maple Street on a sunny Thursday morning in late March 2024. The man who answered the door looked exactly like Billy Thompson would have looked at 35. But more than that, when Agent Chang showed him the age-progressed photo the AI had generated, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, fear, the unmistakable look of someone staring at a ghost of themselves. Michael Davis invited them inside. His hands were shaking as he poured coffee. His wife, Jennifer, was at work. His kids, Emma and Jake, were at school. Just him and 2 federal agents sitting in his living room talking about impossible things. When Agent Chang showed him Billy's 1997 school photo, he stared at it for a full minute without speaking. Then he said something that changed everything. "I used to have dreams about a golden retriever named Buddy." The room went silent. Buddy was never mentioned in any public reports about Billy's disappearance. It was one of those details law enforcement holds back to verify real leads from fake ones. But here was Michael Davis, unprompted, talking about a dog that had died in 2003, 6 years after Billy vanished. A dog he should have no way of knowing existed. More memories started surfacing. Fragments, impressions, the taste of his mother's chocolate chip cookies, the sound of foghorns at night, a bedroom with airplane models hanging from the ceiling. Each detail matched perfectly with what Detective Rodriguez knew about Billy's life. It was like watching someone remember themselves back into existence. But here's the part that made this case extraordinary. Michael Davis didn't want to remember. He had a life, a wife who loved him, children who needed him, a career he'd built from nothing. The possibility that he was Billy Thompson felt like a threat to everything real in his world. How do you choose between two identities when accepting one means destroying the other? Agent Chang explained the situation with brutal honesty. DNA tests would confirm what the facial recognition suggested. The Thompson family would need to know their son was alive. The Davis family would have questions to answer about how they'd acquired a child with no legal history. There would be media attention, congressional hearings about AI and privacy. His quiet life in Sacramento was over regardless of what they discovered. Michael asked for one thing: a chance to tell his family himself before the world found out. Agent Chang agreed. They would wait 48 hours before moving forward with official confirmation. 48 hours for a man to figure out how to explain to his children that their father might not be who they thought he was. Those 48 hours changed everything. Michael called in sick to work. He sat in his backyard staring at his phone, unable to dial his wife's number. How do you start that conversation? How do you tell someone you've been married to for 8 years that your entire relationship might be built on a foundation of stolen identity? He tried researching his past online, looking for any trace of Billy Thompson. What he found broke his heart in ways he wasn't prepared for. Newspaper articles about the search, photos of his biological parents holding vigils. His mother, Linda, now 58 years old, still giving interviews on the anniversary of his disappearance. Still hoping, still waiting, still believing her son would come home. But the most devastating discovery was a video from 2019, Linda Thompson being interviewed by a local news station on the 22nd anniversary of Billy's disappearance. She looked directly into the camera and said something that shattered whatever walls Michael had built around his reconstructed past. "I know he's out there somewhere. Maybe he doesn't remember us. Maybe he has a different life now. That's okay. I just want him to know that his room is still here, that we never stopped loving him, that if he ever wants to come home, we're waiting." Michael called Agent Chang that night. He was ready for the DNA test. The results came back 3 days later. 99.97% probability that Michael Davis was Billy Thompson. The last 0.03% was statistical margin of error. In genetic terms, it was impossible for him to be anyone else. But DNA doesn't solve everything. It just creates new questions. How did an 8-year-old boy from San Francisco end up with a family in Fresno, with no memory of his previous life? Agent Chang reopened the investigation into Robert and Helen Davis. What she found was a carefully constructed story that fell apart under federal scrutiny. Helen Davis had worked at Fresno General during a time when the hospital treated several children from a trafficking ring that operated along Interstate 5. Children with no identification, no family, no one looking for them. The perfect candidates for illegal adoption by couples who couldn't navigate the legitimate system. But Billy Thompson wasn't a trafficking victim. He was a missing child with his face on billboards and milk cartons. Taking him was incredibly risky unless you had inside knowledge of how to make someone disappear completely. Helen Davis had that knowledge. Access to medical records, understanding of how traumatic amnesia worked, the ability to create a believable backstory for a child who couldn't remember his real one. Robert Davis handled the paperwork. Birth certificates, social security applications, school enrollment. He was meticulous, too meticulous. Every document was legally filed and properly notarized, but they all traced back to that single moment in 1998 when Michael Davis officially came into existence. Here's what likely happened. Billy Thompson was taken from the museum in 1997, but not by strangers. Someone who knew the family, someone who understood his schedule and his vulnerabilities. The investigation focused on random abduction, but it should have looked closer to home. Helen Davis was Linda Thompson's nurse when Linda was hospitalized for exhaustion during the search for Billy. She had access to family information. She knew how desperate the situation was. She knew no one would suspect a healthcare worker of being involved. The theory was this: Billy was kept somewhere for months, possibly sedated or psychologically manipulated until his memories began to fade. Children's memories are fragile, especially under trauma. By the time he was placed with the Davis family in 1998, he genuinely couldn't remember his life before. The car accident story was cover for his confusion and gaps in memory, but theory isn't proof, and Robert and Helen Davis were both dead. Helen died of cancer in 2018. Robert had a heart attack in 2021. They took their secrets with them. The only person who could tell the complete story was Michael, and his memories stopped at that hospital bed in Fresno. Agent Chang had to tell Linda Thompson that her son was alive. 27 years of waiting were over. But she also had to explain that the reunion everyone hoped for might not be possible. Billy Thompson was gone. Michael Davis had taken his place. Two different people occupying the same genetic space. The phone call happened on April 15, 2024. Linda Thompson was at work when Agent Chang reached her. She was 58 years old. Still lived in the same house on Oak Street in San Francisco. Still kept Billy's room exactly as he'd left it. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Linda cried for the first hour, asked a million questions for the second hour, spent the third hour planning how to meet the son who wasn't quite her son anymore. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a conference room at the FBI's San Francisco field office. Michael drove down from Sacramento with Jennifer and the kids. Linda brought Frank, Billy's father, even though they'd been divorced for over 20 years. Some moments are too big for old grievances. What happened in that room was simultaneously the most beautiful and most heartbreaking thing Agent Chang had ever witnessed. Linda recognized her son immediately. The same eyes, the same way he touched his ear when he was nervous, the same crooked smile that had melted her heart when he was 8 years old. But Michael looked at her like she was a stranger. Because to him, she was. DNA connected them, artificial intelligence found them, but memory is what makes family real, and Michael's memories belonged to someone else. He tried to feel what he thought he should feel: love, recognition, homecoming. But all he felt was confusion and a profound sadness for the woman who had spent half her life waiting for someone who no longer existed. They talked for hours. Linda showed him photos from his childhood, his first day of school, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. Michael studied each image like he was trying to decode a foreign language. Sometimes there were flickers, a recalled sensation, a half-remembered feeling, but nothing concrete enough to bridge the gap between who he was and who he used to be. Billy's father, Frank, was more direct. He wanted answers. He wanted to know who took his son and why. He wanted justice for 27 years of not knowing. But justice is complicated when the victim doesn't remember being a victim and the perpetrators are dead. What do you prosecute? What do you repair? How do you close a case that solves itself but leaves everyone feeling incomplete? The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. AI solves 27-year-old cold case. Facial recognition reunites missing child with family. The future of finding the lost. The story went viral within hours. Michael's quiet life in Sacramento became a fishbowl of reporters and documentary filmmakers and true crime podcasters wanting to dissect every detail of his reconstructed existence. But the real story wasn't about artificial intelligence solving crimes. It was about what happens when technology outpaces human emotion, when algorithms can find people faster than people can figure out how to reconnect with them, when the tools we build to solve problems create new problems we never anticipated. Michael took a leave of absence from work. He needed time to process what felt like two different lives colliding in slow motion. Jennifer struggled with the revelation. The man she married was real, but his past was stolen. Their children were confused about whether they had new grandparents or if their father was someone else entirely. Normal family dynamics don't have instruction manuals for situations like this. Linda tried to be patient. She'd waited 27 years. She could wait longer for her son to remember loving her. But patience is finite, even for mothers. Every day that passed without recognition felt like losing him all over again. She'd imagined the reunion differently. She'd imagined instant connection, shared memories flooding back, a return to the relationship that had been frozen in time since 1997. Reality was more complicated. Michael was willing to build a relationship with his biological family, but it would have to be a new relationship, not a continuation of something that ended when he was 8. Linda had to mourn the child she lost and learn to love the adult he'd become. It was like meeting your son's replacement and trying to feel the same way about him. The investigation into the Davis family revealed more uncomfortable truths. They weren't monsters. They were childless people who wanted a family and found an illegal way to get one. They loved Michael genuinely, raised him well, gave him opportunities and education and emotional support. In every way that mattered except legally, they were his real parents. But they'd built their family on someone else's tragedy. Linda Thompson's 27 years of grief were the price of their happiness. That's a moral equation that doesn't balance, no matter how you calculate it. Agent Chang closed the case in June 2024. Billy Thompson was found. Michael Davis was confirmed to be the missing child. The investigation into his disappearance revealed probable cause, but no living suspects to prosecute. Case cleared by exceptional means. Statistics satisfied. Justice remained elusive. The facial recognition system that solved the case continued scanning millions of faces every day, looking for other Billy Thompsons, other children lost to time and circumstance. The AI didn't understand irony, but there was something poetic about machines helping humans find each other in a world that seemed increasingly designed to keep people apart. Michael decided to legally change his name to Michael Thompson Davis, a compromise between two identities that couldn't coexist but couldn't be separated either. He kept his job, kept his family, but added regular visits to San Francisco to slowly build relationships with people who remembered loving someone he used to be. Linda learned to call him Michael instead of Billy. It was harder than it sounds. The name Billy was wrapped up in decades of hope and prayer and desperate love. Michael was a stranger's name attached to her son's DNA. But names are just words. Love is more flexible than language. The technology that solved the case raised questions nobody was prepared to answer. If artificial intelligence could identify a missing child from a casual selfie, what else could it discover? What other secrets were hiding in plain sight on social media? How much privacy do we give up when we post our faces online for algorithms to analyze? The European Union was already implementing strict regulations on facial recognition. The United States was debating similar measures. But the technology moved faster than legislation. Every day, more sophisticated systems came online. More faces were scanned. More connections were made between past and present. Michael's case became a landmark in the discussion about AI ethics and digital privacy. Congressional hearings featured his story as both a success story and a cautionary tale. He testified about the benefits of technology that could reunite families. Linda testified about the right of missing children to be found regardless of privacy concerns. Both were right. Both perspectives couldn't coexist without friction. The question that haunted everyone involved was this: if Michael Davis was happy with his life before the facial recognition identified him as Billy Thompson, did artificial intelligence help him or hurt him? Did solving the case create more problems than it resolved? There's no clear answer. Michael gained a biological family but lost his privacy. Linda found her son but discovered he was someone else. The technology worked exactly as designed, but human relationships don't operate like algorithms. They can't be optimized or debugged or updated with patches. What we learned from Billy Thompson's case is that artificial intelligence is incredibly good at finding people, but finding someone isn't the same as reconnecting with them. Technology can bridge physical distance and overcome temporal gaps, but it can't repair emotional trauma or restore lost memories or guarantee that reunions will heal old wounds. The case closed, but the story continues. Michael visits his biological parents twice a month. He's building relationships with siblings he doesn't remember having. His children are learning to love grandparents who are strangers, carrying decades of grief and hope. Jennifer is adjusting to a family history that includes people her husband can't remember. It's messy and complicated, and nothing like the fairy tale reunions you see in movies, but it's real in a way that matters more than perfect endings. As for the artificial intelligence that started it all, it keeps working, scanning faces, making connections, solving cases that human investigators couldn't crack. It doesn't understand the emotional weight of its discoveries. It doesn't consider the human cost of digital omniscience. It just processes data and reports matches and moves on to the next face in the endless stream of images we feed it every day. Picture this. You post a selfie celebrating your birthday. You're happy, content with your life, unaware that somewhere in a server farm, an algorithm is comparing your face to databases of missing persons, cold cases, and unidentified remains. You're unaware that your privacy ended the moment you clicked share, and that artificial intelligence might know more about your identity than you do. Billy Thompson's case was solved by technology that most people don't understand and can't control. His reunion with his family was enabled by systems that track us constantly and invisibly. The same tools that found him are watching all of us, learning our faces, connecting us to databases we didn't know existed. The future of finding the lost might depend on artificial intelligence, but the future of human privacy is being written by the same algorithms. Every face we share online becomes part of a vast digital panopticon where missing persons can be found, but where none of us can really disappear. What Billy Thompson's story teaches us is that sometimes being found is more complicated than being lost. Sometimes the people looking for us aren't the people we want to be found by. Sometimes artificial intelligence can solve problems that create bigger problems we're not ready to face. The boy who disappeared in 1997 was found in 2024, but the man who lived those 27 years in between might have been lost in the process. Technology reunited a family, but it couldn't reunite a person with themselves. That's the kind of problem that algorithms can't solve, no matter how sophisticated they become. In the end, Billy Thompson came home. But home wasn't where he left it, and he wasn't who he was when he left. The artificial intelligence that found him worked perfectly. The human heart that received him is still learning how to love someone who carries the face of memory, but not its contents. That's the real mystery, not how Billy Thompson disappeared, but how Michael Davis learned to live with being found.